Hello, everyone. Welcome to Breaking Into Tech. I'm really excited to have Jonathan here today to talk about his experience at Sabio. So, welcome to the show.
Hello, everyone.
So, let's start with a little bit about who you are. Can you tell us a little bit about your background? And then we'll dive into your experience at Sabio.
Sure. I'll start off with my military experience. So I have 8 years experience in the Air Force. Had a few different jobs in there. When I got out of the Air Force, so my last job in the Air Force was working in IT. And when I talk about IT, I'm talking about like for me, it was network infrastructure. So I always think of hardware stuff. So I did that for about a year after I got out. And on the side, I was also kind of teaching game development with the Unity game engine. And I was teaching through YouTube. I also had like a few courses up on Udemy. And so I was doing that on the side and I got tired of IT and I said, you know what, let me try to see if I can go bigger with the game development stuff. And so after about a year working in IT, I reached out to this company called CG Cookie and they had some Unity stuff on there. And I was like, hey, let's do a guest post type thing. That was a big thing back then. And so I sent them a video. They really, really liked it. So they actually paid me for that. And then a few months later, I worked as a game developer for them for about 5, 6 years. So that was right before I got into Sabio. So that's kind of my experience prior to joining Sabio.
Yeah, so it sounds like you were in tech and you had it sounded like you had a successful career and everything seemed to be going the right way. So, what led you to decide to look into attending a software engineering boot camp?
So basically, right when I was living in San Diego, I was working for the company CG Cookie, and I was also teaching at a community college. And I was doing pretty good. I really enjoyed that, but I was getting to a point where I felt like I was hitting the ceiling in terms of pay, but also in terms of like what I was doing. It just felt I was kind of getting burnt out. And I said, you know what? At the time, we were thinking about moving to Orange County in Fullerton. And I thought, since we're moving, I want to have like a fresh start. I want to have something completely different in terms of a career. And so I was like, how about I look into a coding boot camp? And then I was like, okay, well, if I can find a coding boot camp that's within Orange County and also takes the GI Bill, then I'll do that. And that's how I found Savio, the one in Irvine. I was like, oh, that's perfect. So everything kind of fell into place when I moved to Orange County. About a week later, I started Savio.
That's awesome. And so you said GI Bill. So did you use your GI Bill or did you use vet tech for when you went to Sabio?
So I used my GI Bill. I actually didn't even know about VetTech until I went in there. There was a couple friends that were using VetTech there, and that was completely new to me. But I'm glad I used my GI Bill. Luckily, I had enough left in my GI Bill to be able to use that, so I didn't have any issues with that.
Yeah, I love that you have both the option to use vet tech and to use the GI Bill. And if you have, enough time in your GI Bill, there's not really any reason not to use it. Um, so it's such a great, benefit to get your schooling paid for and then get the stipend. And so that sounds like a great way. So it's like boom, 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 everything
hmm
landed, and that's how you ended up at Sabio. So did you use the internet? How did you find Sabio when you were looking for a software engineering bootcamp?
So it was a little bit difficult. I'm not really even sure how I landed on Savio. There's like a few in LA, but I was like, nah, that's too far to drive. And then I happened to find Savio somehow. I found the Irvine location, and I think that was like the only one in Orange County that also accepted the GI Bill. So yeah, that's how I found it.
Okay. And then once you found it, did you attend an info session or anything like that to learn more about the program?
Yeah, so I did go through one info session just to, I think Liliana was hosting it, and just to understand what they taught, the general workflow, like what's expected from me, and what I would learn as well. So that was pretty informational for me.
Yeah. And then so everything lined up, it was the right place, right time, everything. So you decided to start going and it happened, you moved here and then like a week later you started, is that what you said? Or moved to the
Yes,
LA area? Yeah.
yes.
So what were the first few weeks of the boot camp like as you're
Uh,
adjusting with moving?
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, it was kind of stressful. Thankfully, we had moved in at least enough to where we could get settled down. The first few weeks of Fabio were rough for me. So I still had plenty of experience with coding in general, but it was a very narrow focus with game development and using C sharp. And then I'm learning all these new concepts that were completely new to me. So it was tough at first. I think the first few days I was kind of freaking out because I couldn't grasp certain concepts. I couldn't grasp certain terminology. Uh, but I think you kind of get used to it over time, and then you finally go, okay, now I get it. But yeah, it wasn't even for me with having experience. It was still a bit tough.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so, how did you find your stride with, going through the program? Did something just click, or how did you keep going? Because it's a really challenging, especially if everything's not clicking right away.
Sure. So like when we first started with, I don't know if you still do this now, but we started with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript basic stuff, and that went pretty good for the most part because I did have some experience with that when I was much younger. I did some web development using that stuff, but once we started getting into React and database stuff, it took some time. I think with the database stuff, when we were creating all those procs over and over again, I think that's doing stuff over and over again made it a lot easier to understand later on, even if you didn't understand at that time. As you kept doing it over and over, eventually there's that one little piece that just clicks and it brings it all together, and then like, oh, now it makes sense. So it's just a matter of just doing stuff over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why it's such a challenging course because you have to do it over and over and over to like make it click and,
Hmm.
run into problems, figure out what you did wrong so that you can solve those problems and keep coming back to it. And it's the only way really to learn it is to do that hands-on learning and figure out where you're gonna steer wrong, and everyone has their own way of processing through it, so that makes a lot of sense. So every class does a cohort class or cohort program. So what was your guys' cohort and what were you doing?
I don't remember the exact cohort. I want to say it was 80 or 81. I assume you're talking about the project that we created at the end of
Yeah,
the
the
capstone
project.
project. We were working on this medical application. I'm not even sure if it's still up now. I don't think it is. But it was basically an application to make it easier for, I guess, customers or patients and doctors to communicate. So as a patient, I would be able to go on this website and then say, hey, I'm looking for a doctor that treats this, this, and this, and accepts this insurance, and it's within this area. So basically being able to find doctors, but also more importantly, from the doctor's perspective, being able to submit all of their information like accurately to, I think that's sent out to insurance companies like 4 times a year. Otherwise, they get fined. And before it was a very long, lengthy process, a very manual process through paperwork and all this kind of stuff. So this application was supposed to make it a lot easier and more streamlined for both patients and doctors, and that's what we worked on.
And then what I love about the capstone project is how you get to do like hands-on learning, and it's not just like, you know, theoretically based projects,
Mhm.
that it's actually something that you're creating for a customer. So what was your exact role in creating that system that you were talking about?
So some of the stuff that I worked on was like the login system when people will log in, being able to have a password reset system as well. So being able to send out emails. So like if you forgot your password, you get an email with a unique link, and then you can change your password. I also worked on a few other things like the search functionality for addresses. So you could type in an address, say, hey, look for this specific location, and use the Google Maps API to display like, hey, doctor's here, here, and here. And then also worked with a few other of my cohort mates on other stuff like a multi-step form and stuff like that. So it was pretty varied for the most part.
Yeah, but it sounds like you got a lot of experience. Do you think that doing that project was able to help you when you graduated and started doing interviews?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we're working on full stack application. We worked on the database side, the backend API side, and the front end. And my first job actually dealt with a lot of similar stuff. So working with .NET and working with React, which helped me directly with the job that I got after Sabio.
Yeah, so let's talk about graduation and like as you get near the end of near closer to graduation, it's time to start sending out resumes and setting up interviews. So what was that experience like for you?
I mean, it's always tough. I think near the last 2 weeks of our class, everyone was sending out emails or resumes out to various locations, and hundreds of job applications went out. When I graduated, so I went into Sabio at the end of 2019, and I graduated at the end of January 2020, which we all know was like right before the pandemic hit, full swing in the U.S. at least. So it was basically perfect timing because I got a job in February of that year at a local I say local. It was kind of down the street from Sabio. It was like a financial company that did mortgages, and there's a lot around Sabio. So a lot of us got jobs in those same areas, and that's what worked out for me.
Yeah, we were talking a little bit before about how, the timing with the pandemic. And so you were in person because, I mean, before the pandemic, Sabio had case by case offerings of virtual, but most everybody was in the classroom. And then you got your job and you were working on site, and then it switched to remote, and now you're still working remote. So, yeah, I think that's just an interesting timing to like go through graduation and then get a job. So it sounds like you got a job pretty quickly. So was there anything specific that you did either in the interview or in the resume process that helped you find that job?
I mean, I can't say that there's anything specific that I did and be like, okay, yeah, I definitely got that job because of this. It was always kind of like a toss up. I don't even remember if I applied directly to this job, but I remember them contacting me, like the project manager called me directly and just started asking me questions about, hey, can you do this, this, and this? I was like, yes, yes, yes. And then the actual interview on site was more the same, but it was more technically focused. So it was actually a pretty ideal first job or first interview process because it was very direct and it was more question based. I didn't even have a technical interview per se, but I think that they saw my resume and they're like, okay, well, let's take a chance on him, and it worked out.
Yeah, and it was in that general area, so it sounds like they had a relationship with Sabio, so they knew what Sabio
Mhm.
graduates had. So that's always a good thing to have, the network of, Sabio's name of the going through that program, and then them just, double checking by doing an interview to
Mhm.
make sure you're a good fit. So you started your job working on site, and then the pandemic hit and you went to remote. Was that a difficult transition to switch, or what was that like?
So prior to me even going to Sabio, I'd been working remotely for about 6 years or so, 6, 7 years. And so one of the things that really enticed me about going to Sabio and working as a software engineer is like I'm finally going to get to work on site, which I know is like a weird thing to say now, but after working so long remotely, I was like, hey, I want to work with other people now directly. So being on site, I was like, great. But when I went on site, I realized I was basically the only developer in my, I guess, field, or there was like a project manager and then there was me, but we're like vastly different in terms of our job responsibility. So by the time we went remote, I was like, okay, well, I'm going back to how it works. It's just a different workflow. But I was pretty comfortable with that because I already had a ton of experience working
Yeah.
remotely.
Yeah. So you were on site and you're like, "Okay, I could pretty much do this job from home," and then the pandemic happened, and you're like, "Yep, yep, I can." So,
Yeah.
yeah. So, have you stayed at the same job since, that first job, or have you moved around? What have you been doing today?
So basically, after that was a very short contract. It was like a 5 month contract, and after that contract was over, they didn't renew it because the pandemic hit, and they basically slashed the team down.
Right.
So after that, I realized that I didn't really like working with .NET, and I didn't like the applications that I'll be building with that. And that's a personal thing. So for me, after I got let off, um, I took 3 months off and I said, hey, what do I want to focus on as far as learning? And I realized I want to learn just full stack JavaScript. So I learned Node and Express and all the tools that go along with that. And thankfully, we were at a time where unemployment was paying pretty big, on a weekly basis. So it was enough for me to be able to pay my bills and still learn. And then after that, I happened to someone reached out to me, a recruiter, for a job at Universal Music Group, and it was one of those jobs. It was like far and above beyond what I thought I could get, and I thought it was a joke at first. I was like, all right, whatever, I'll just apply, and they actually liked me, so I was like, all right, great, and it was using the skills that I learned over that break, which was great. I was like, okay, now I'm heading in the right direction. So that's what I've been doing since.
I love that story because I love that not only did you like stop and take a break and figure out like, wait, I didn't actually enjoy that. And so, but there's lots of opportunities. I'm going to do an interview later this month with Liliana on all the different jobs you can do, because sometimes you think of only one particular. And so I love that you took that time. And then you also mentioned another thing that a lot of my past guests have talked about how you have to continually learn and gain new skills. And it's not just like, I graduated from Sabio, I know everything. It's like, no, I just barely know a little bit and there's still a lot more to learn. And so I love how you took those two things of like taking time to figure out what you want and then gaining those skills. And then the job came and you were like, I can't do that, but whatever. I'll put my name in the hat, and then you were able to get the job. So that's really, I love hearing that story. It's so awesome to see like everything that we've talked on past podcast interviews all coming together in that story. So that's really awesome. Yeah. That's really cool. I love that. So, and that shows like the power of LinkedIn and recruiters and,
Mhm.
saying yes to something even when you're not sure if you can do it.
Yeah.
So do you have, on that note, do you have any advice for people who are considering a career in software engineering?
Yeah. So one thing that I would say, this is probably a little bit different, is that you need to find your own unique niche. So everyone that graduates from Sabio, don't just think of yourself as, say, a full stack developer. There's millions of those. So you need to combine your past experience or a passion with software engineering. So for me, a lot of times the jobs that reach out to me, big companies that reach out to me, they're looking at my past experience working with games. And I have experience working with 3D stuff on the web, and then combine that with full stack development. Now that's a unique skill set, because if you're just working as a full stack developer, you're competing with a much larger amount of people, right? So if you combine different unique skill sets or different passions, like let's say you really like music and you like full stack development, that's a smaller skill set and smaller group of people that you're competing with. So I would say find whatever you really want to do in tech. Tech's huge. Uh, find that one unique skill set or field that you really like, and then just go deep with it and get really, really good at it. Because now you're not only competing with a smaller pool of people, but also you're more interested in that one field. You're going to learn more. You're going to learn more rapidly because it's something that interests you and you want to get better and better.
Yeah, I love that advice. It's such a good way to look at things, especially to stand out in a crowd because you're right. Like there are so many software engineers, but if you can find something that you're passionate about and then, that'll make you stand out, and maybe even there's like a company that you want to work for, and so you find like what are they doing, and then you can go down that route and make it so that your resume and your interview, you are the person that they hire because you've done all that extra work instead of just
Mhm.
throwing it out everywhere and trying to get something. Is there any advice you would give to someone who is about to graduate and about to do interviews? Is there anything that you learned in the interview process that you can pass on as advice?
I would say the interviews with me, I mean, I'm not a great interviewer. I think I do well in some interviews, terrible in others. But it's a skill. You just have to keep doing it over and over. So even if you do have a job, just reach out. Like if you see a company or a job that interests you, just apply for it and interview for it. Don't waste people's time with jobs that you know you're not going to take. But best case scenario, you get a new job. You move up. Worst case scenario, you get experience with interviewing. And it's good to do that, even if you've been in a job for a year or two, just because you want to also see what's out there as well. So you want to be prepared for what they're going to throw at you, so to speak.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice because I think sometimes when people don't get jobs, they can look at it as a failure, but really it's just a learning opportunity to, enhance your skills, figure out like what about that company didn't work out that they didn't pick you, and there's always like really good candidates, so it's really hard to stand out, and so it's important to just practice, practice, practice.
Mhm.
So my last question is, where do you see yourself in 2 to 5 years? Uh, do you know what the future has planned for you? It sounds like you have such a, like, if you look at, I looked at your LinkedIn profile before the interview and there was so much stuff that you've done. Um, so do you know what you have planned for the future?
No, I mean, I know where I want to go. So right now I'm working as a senior full stack engineer, a senior software engineer. And again, for me, the next big step up is to work as a staff engineer, which is quite a bit different from a senior engineer, but then move up from there. There's like principal and then like, I don't know, I guess architect, but just keep moving up. I still very much enjoy the actual software creation process. So I don't want to be into like a managerial role or something like that. So staff engineer is kind of like the perfect mix where it's still a step above, but it's still, directly working with the code itself.
Yeah, I love that because you also pinpointed like I already know I don't want to go into that manager role because I do like doing the software engineering. And so it sounds like you really understand like who you are and what you want to do, and that's so important for, not only you yourself, but your employer, because you already know like where you want to go and what you're working for. And so that can help you be an even better engineer for them, a software engineer, full stack developer. So yeah. So thank you so much for being a guest. I really think there's so many words of wisdom that you've gotten to share, and just um really interesting to hear your journey as you got that temporary job during the pandemic, and then you had to reset your focus and find a new job. So thank you so much for being a guest. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.